Science. The noble pursuit of truth, progress, and occasionally just seeing what happens when you mildly traumatize someone in the name of research. For every medical breakthrough and world-saving innovation, there's a trail of, let's call them questionable decisions made by people in lab coats who apparently skipped ethics class. Because sometimes science gets weird, and not in a look at this cool chemical reaction way, but more like, wait, they did what to volunteers? Kind of weird. So today, we're diving into the most unhinged, ethically wobbly, and probably should have been illegal scientific experiments that somehow actually happened. Let's get right into it. Number 8. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study. And finally, we arrive at one of the most unethical and infamous experiments in American history, the Tuskegee Syphilis Study. Between 1932 and 1972, the US Public Health Service studied the long-term effects of untreated syphilis in black men, specifically 600 poor, rural men in Alabama. The researchers told them they were receiving free healthcare. They weren't. In fact, even after penicillin became a known cure, the men were deliberately denied treatment, just so researchers could watch the disease progress. They suffered blindness, mental illness, organ failure, and death, all while being lied to. Even their families were affected. Some wives contracted syphilis, and some children were born with congenital infections, all because a group of scientists thought it was okay to treat human lives like petri dishes. It wasn't until a whistleblower came forward in 1972 that the study was shut down. That's 40 years of lies, exploitation, and preventable suffering. The fallout was so devastating that it created massive mistrust in the medical system, especially in the black community, a mistrust that still echoes today. The government later issued a formal apology in 1997, which is nice, but also 65 years too late. If there's a takeaway here, it's this: when science forgets its humanity, it doesn't just fail ethically, it fails completely. Number 7. Project MKULTRA, the CIA's acid trip. Yes, MKULTRA. The moment the US government looked at LSD and thought, you know what would go great with this? Mind control. In the 1950s and 60s, the CIA launched Project MKULTRA, a classified experiment to test whether drugs, hypnosis, and sensory deprivation could be used to control people's minds. Because obviously, the best way to protect democracy is by slipping acid into someone's drink without telling them. They tested this stuff on prisoners, psychiatric patients, soldiers, and even civilians, many of whom had no idea they were part of an experiment. Picture showing up for therapy and accidentally getting dosed with LSD so the government can see if you'll start confessing state secrets you don't even know. One participant, Frank Olson, was a US Army scientist who was unknowingly dosed and later fell out of a hotel window under mysterious circumstances. The official story? Suicide. The not-so-official story? Possibly murdered after he started asking too many questions. Fun. The project was so secretive that it didn't come to light until the 1970s, when government documents were accidentally declassified, leading to public outrage and a very uncomfortable congressional hearing. To this day, some MKULTRA records were destroyed, so we may never know the full scope. But one thing's clear: if your tax dollars are going toward involuntary acid trips and brainwashing trials, maybe the real conspiracy theorists weren't that off base. So, yeah, next time someone says science is boring, remind them the CIA once tried to weaponize mushrooms and telepathy, for real. Number 6. The Aversion Therapy Files. Let's travel back to the golden age of bad decisions, the 1950s and 60s, when aversion therapy was all the rage for treating behaviors that science didn't actually understand, like homosexuality. That's right, being gay was once classified as a mental illness, and psychologists thought the cure was, wait for it, torture. Aversion therapy involved hooking people up to electrodes and administering painful electric shocks, chemical injections to induce vomiting, or blasting nauseating images every time the person saw same-sex content or expressed same-sex attraction. Because nothing says compassionate healthcare like, oh, you're gay, let's try to associate that with projectile vomiting. And in case you're wondering, no, it didn't work. All it did was traumatize patients, many of whom later suffered from PTSD, depression, and anxiety. One especially horrifying case? In South Africa, the military reportedly forced gay conscripts into aversion therapy camps and subjected them to chemical castration and retraining. You know, like they were broken robots instead of people. Modern psychology has since condemned these practices and removed homosexuality from the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. But it took until 1973, which frankly is not that long ago. If you need a reminder of how not so distant science has been used to justify cruelty, look no further than aversion therapy, the psychological equivalent of using a chainsaw to cut a sandwich. Number 4, the David Reimer case warning. This one's not quirky, it's just dark. In the 1960s, psychologist John Money, who apparently moonlighted as a villain in a morality play, wanted to prove that gender identity was entirely a result of upbringing. So, when a baby boy named David Reimer lost his penis in a botched circumcision, yes, that happened, Dr. Money stepped in with a brilliantly horrifying idea. Raise David as a girl and see what happens. They named the child Brenda, dressed her as a girl, told her she was a girl, and routinely forced her and her twin brother into inappropriate sexual rehearsal therapy sessions to reinforce gender roles. No, I will not go into the details. You can Google it if you're ready to lose your faith in humanity. Spoiler, it didn't work. David never identified as female, suffered immense psychological trauma, and eventually transitioned back to living as male in adulthood. Tragically, he took his own life years later. John Money, meanwhile, he presented the case as a success story for years, using it to promote his theory and boost his academic reputation. This experiment has since been cited as a horrifying example of what happens when science forgets that test subjects are human beings, not proof of concept dolls. Let this be a lesson. If your experiment begins with the sentence, "Let's surgically alter a baby and gaslight them for 2 decades," maybe just don't. Number 3, the Milgram shock machine. Let's talk about obedience, specifically how far people will go when someone in a lab coat tells them to keep going, even if that going involves electrocuting another human being. Enter the Milgram experiment of 1961, aka what happens if you make regular people think they're torturing strangers for science? Psychologist Stanley Milgram designed the study to test whether people would obey authority figures even when it meant hurting someone. Participants were told they were part of a memory experiment and were assigned the role of teacher. Their job? Read word pairs and administer an electric shock every time the learner, who was actually an actor, got one wrong. The shocks weren't real, but the participants didn't know that, and as the test went on, the voltage increased. The actor would scream, bang on the wall, beg for mercy, and eventually go completely silent. And every time the participant hesitated, the experimenter just said, "Please continue." 2/3 of participants went all the way to the highest voltage, that's 450 volts, a fake lethal shock because a guy in a lab coat told them to. Milgram wanted to understand how ordinary people could commit atrocities, think Nazi Germany, and his experiment showed just how disturbingly easy it is to get someone to cross moral lines if they're told, "It's okay, you're not responsible, it's haunting, it's iconic." And yeah, it probably wouldn't pass an ethics review today, because giving people emotional trauma and then debriefing with, "Haha, just kidding, no one died," isn't exactly best practice. Number 2, the Stanford prison disaster. Let's say you want to study human behavior in prisons. Sounds fair. You round up some college students, split them into guards and prisoners, and set up a pretend jail in the basement of Stanford University. What could go wrong? Everything. This was the Stanford prison experiment conducted in 1971 by psychologist Philip Zimbardo, who not only designed the study, but also made himself prison superintendent. Conflict of interest? Just a smidge. The experiment was supposed to last 2 weeks. It lasted 6 days. Why? Because the guards turned into power-hungry tyrants, abusing the prisoners, who, remember, were just regular dudes, to the point of emotional breakdowns. Participants were humiliated, sleep-deprived, and psychologically tortured, all in the name of understanding authority. Spoiler alert, turns out people can be awful with even a tiny bit of unchecked power. Shocking. Even more disturbing? Zimbardo only stopped the experiment when his girlfriend walked in, saw what was happening and said, "What the hell is wrong with you?" Not the academic review board, not a safety officer, his girlfriend. The whole thing has since been criticized for ethical failures, shoddy science, and, oh yeah, completely traumatizing people. But it did teach us something. Never underestimate the chaos potential of bored college students and a clipboard. Number 1, the monster study. Once upon a time in 1939, because of course it was the 30s, a group of researchers decided it would be fun to give kids speech problems on purpose just to see what would happen. The experiment, charmingly called the Monster Study, was conducted at the University of Iowa. Researchers took 22 orphaned children, yes, orphans, because if you're going to be unethical, you might as well go all in, and split them into two groups. One group received positive speech therapy. The other group? Not so much. The second group was regularly told they spoke badly, that they stuttered, that their speech was broken, even if it wasn't. These kids had totally normal speech before the study, but not all of them came out the other side that way. Some kids developed speech problems as a result of the psychological pressure. You know, like if you constantly told a kid they were bad at walking until they started limping just to please you. Real healthy stuff. The researchers didn't publish the study at the time because, shocker, they realized it might be considered a little unethical. It stayed hidden for decades before resurfacing and being rightfully dragged through the mud. So yeah, science lesson learned, don't psychologically destroy children to test a theory. Especially not orphan children. That's not research, that's the origin story for a Disney villain. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.